Have you ever stopped to ask, how is Chhattakabra? While mercilessly caving in the skull of a 2-star monster, have you ever thought about its feelings or given it any consideration? I would venture to guess not, but rest assured I will take the bold action of doing so myself in this video. In my last video, I talked about difficulty in the series, and that was a very divisive topic, and I got a lot of traction and spawned a lot of interesting discussion. I appreciate everyone who watched it and left a comment, and especially those who decided to subscribe. This time, though, we're going to speak on a decidedly less divisive topic, hopefully. Today, I want to look at the so-called punching bag monsters in the series, mainly the monsters you encounter as your first or second large monster in a game. We'll take a look at their role in the game, their mechanics, their design, and so forth. And since this is a sort of a rating, I thought I could chuck each monster I talk about into a mostly made-up tier list. People like tier lists, right? Is this still a hot trend? We've got categories such as Just a Little Guy, Good Monster, Mid, and Demon. I'm Mose, let's get right into it. I thought we could just go in order from the games they appear in first. Going all the way back to Monster Hunter 1, Velocidrome occupies a bit of a unique space. Back in Gen 1, the drones weren't treated as a normal large monster. It was more like they were a half step up from small monsters. They even had a different icon if you painted them that was smaller. They had less unique parts to them, and mostly just dropped the corresponding prey parts. I think this is actually really interesting because they used Velocidrome as part of a very smooth tutorial curve. You start with gathering herbs and mushrooms and honey to learn to craft, then you start fighting some small monsters. After that you move on to fighting sort of the pack leader of the Velociprey, who isn't really much different than them, but is a little more aggressive and has more HP to teach you the basics of combat. And then finally, you get to move on to your first proper large monster to put all these things to the test. Most games in the series don't go to such lengths to try to ease you into the various mechanics, and instead they'll just throw you into a large monster fight very quickly, which is probably arguably less user-friendly. I think this actually elevates Velocidrome quite a bit above some other starting monsters. I have a great appreciation for when games try to blend their tutorials somewhat seamlessly into the gameplay, and I think they did a decent job of that with Velocidrome, tying it all together. Taking all this into consideration, I'd say our original punching bag tutorial monster, Velocidrome, goes solidly into the good monster tier. I'm going to talk about the other first-gen dromes too, even though they're not starter monsters, because they're all pretty similar. Gendrome is up next. Mechanically, mostly the same as Velocidrome other than his leap which can inflict paralysis. This could be your first experience with status in the game too, so that's interesting. I have fond-ish memories of farming this guy for paralysis sacks. I've always felt like Gendrome kind of doesn't stick out much for where he's placed in the game. You won't encounter him until a 4-star village, which is pretty late, and he kind of just falls over and dies at that point if you've kept your gear up to date. For this reason, I think I will grant him the category of mid. Arjuros is literally the same as the last two, except he's strangely tanky and spits poison. The tanky part kind of brings this guy down for me because making a punching bag take longer to go down doesn't actually make them more interesting. Gendrome and Arjuros both suffer from content scarcity issues. The Monster Hunter 1 roster isn't very large, and not all monsters are even available in Village, so these two monsters end up being relegated to mid to late game fights, which of course feels a little awkward. They did try to spice it up a bit by having quests where you need to hunt 2 or even 3 of them, but in my opinion at least, those quests just end up being boring. Arjuros is ugly and annoying, by the way. Demon. Bulldrome may not be the actual first large monster you fight in Monster Hunter 2, but he is the lowest tier new monster you'll fight, so he's next on the list. I feel like if any monster is going to be called a punching bag, no one is more qualified to that title than Bulldrome. Truly, this guy only gets bullied, and there isn't much he can do about it. Did you know in 2nd gen he has a 120 thunder hit zone? Bro literally gets cooked by static electricity. Despite this, I do think he's actually pretty fun to fight, in a weird target dummy kind of way. If we're being generous, he does technically teach you to be aware of enemy attacks. When you're close to him, he'll do his little whip-around move that does damage in front and side, which will hit you if you don't move when you see him started up. It sort of teaches a new player to not just button mash and be aware of positioning. He's shown up in later games, but they didn't even improve him that much. Poor guy. My personal opinion is he's cute and I like him, and there's really no way to dislike anything about him, so he's just a little guy. In 3rd gen, we have the great early bird wyverns. marking a shift in naming convention for the English localization away from drones. Great Jaggy is up first. Great Jaggy and his contemporaries are basically just 3rd gen analogs for the 1st gen drones, with Great Baggy having sleep instead of Gendrome's paralysis. I've always found Great Jaggy to be a bit difficult to keep up with for an early game monster. He can juke you out with surprising precision. This was especially true when I was newer to playing the old gen games and playing slower weapons like Greatsword. 3rd gen made great strides in improving monster mechanics, and Great Jaggy is no exception. For my personal feelings, I'm often critical of the 3rd gen roster of monsters, especially the ones from Tri, but Great Jaggy I feel is one that I like quite a lot. He could go in good monster, but I also think he's just a little guy, so there he goes. Great Baggy is much like Great Jaggy, except he spits sleep at you. I think this guy is actually pretty formidable. Sleep can be devastating, and with the little baggies ganging up on you as well, it can be hard to avoid. But there is also counterplay in the form of energy drinks or the various tricks to prevent sleep from activating. Also in 3 Ultimate G rank, he's insanely fast for some reason, which is really funny and makes him kind of a real threat. Great Baggy occupies the same spot that Gendrome did back in Gen 1, but I think he just does the job better. Again, indicative of improvements in monster design over time. I would say Great Baggy is properly a good monster. Great Raggy was not part of the original 3rd gen lineup, but came with Portable 3rd instead. He's kind of got Iodrome syndrome. Does syndrome imply the existence of a sin prey? Anyway, Great Raggy does have some new stuff going for him. Poison Cloud Area Denial is neat. I think his visual design looks nice, and breaking his chin ballsack is always satisfying. I didn't mention this with the other 2, but they all have satisfying head breaks. Always a fan of that. I'm going to put Raggy in mid. There's one more 3rd gen starter monster that has to be talked about, and that is Arjuros. He was actually the first monster you encounter in Portable 3rd. He's the first bear monster in the series and brings a totally new moveset to the table, which is later partially shared by Lagambi in the same game. I have to say, I think Arjuros is kind of Bulldrome tier in terms of his fight. He has more moves at least. He can charge at you, swipe at you, and grab you. He can kind of twist around to get you if you're not in front of him, so that's nice. But really just staying behind and hitting his butt basically annihilates him. And you know what? That's fair. I would probably also get annihilated by someone doing that to me. He does have one unique mechanic, where if you have honey in your inventory when he grabs you, he'll actually drop you to eat your honey. And it gives you a big damage opening. I think mechanics like that add a lot to a monster, and it's something that became more common as the series went on. I'm not sure I would say he's a good monster, but he's also not just a little guy. I think I'm going to have to put him in mid. Moving on to 4th gen, our starter monster from Monster Hunter 4 is Seltus, and honestly it's probably unfair to talk about him without Seltus Queen since they kind of are 2 halves of one fight, but they do make you fight him alone to start with. I gotta say, for being in that situation, he does actually put up a good fight on his own, for a starting monster at least. He flies as part of his fight, which is unique for starting monsters at this point. That's a great opportunity for players to try out the new airborne insect glaive moves. When he's flying, he's at his most threatening too. He has some moves that come out pretty fast and can really catch you off guard. He can also afflict you with the defense down status. Another satisfying head break as well. Unfortunately, if you manage to knock him out of the air, he becomes completely unable to threaten you at all, more or less. But he is a starting monster after all, so that does kind of come with the territory. He does get redeemed by taking Seltus Queen into consideration, though I don't know if he would see it that way, considering he gets mind-controlled and turned into a weapon. Is it controversial to say this guy is a good monster? By starter monster standards, at least. He's not the most interesting or anything, but I feel like he's a very 4th gen starter monster type guy, if that makes sense. He feels modern in some ways, so yeah, good monster. Not just a little guy though. Little guys are not bugs. As we rapidly approach the modern era of Monhun, even starter monsters are becoming more complex and more interesting. Great Macau has a lot going on. This guy will actually kick the shit out of you. He's faster than you expect a starter monster to normally be, and has pretty dynamic movement that can really catch you off guard. I imagine for a new player, he's probably pretty genuinely challenging. When he gets up on his tail and telegraphs his leap, it's possible to knock him down onto the ground, which is a neat bit of risk versus reward gameplay. I personally think Great Macau is probably the best starter monster in the series. I think he's got a cool visual design and harkens back to the older dromes and greats, while mechanically being a very modernized take on them. He's going straight to the top of good monster. Into 5th gen, and that means it's Great Jaggers time. A new body type for a starter monster is always exciting. In many ways, World was a reboot of the series and introduced a lot of new gameplay mechanics and styles, and I think for that reason they played it a bit conservative with Great Jaggers' design in comparison to the 4th gen starter monsters. He feels very back to basics, which is fitting for a monster where basically everyone was learning how to play the game, both new and old players. The way he engorges himself to become larger reminds me a bit of a toned-down Zamtrios. Ultimately, though, he doesn't have any unique mechanics. He's just a big lizard that rolls around on you and swipes at you. I could almost not recall what his attacks were before making this video because he's just not very memorable, I feel. I would say he goes into the mid category. Up next we have the Great Isuchi. Now here's an interesting monster. Well, maybe that's overselling it a bit, but he's got an edge over Jaggers, at least. He's got a pack mechanic where his little dudes attack alongside him. I don't know if he actually makes a very good starter monster, though. A lot of monsters in Base Rise have an issue with getting extremely bullied by the cracked-out hunters, and Isuchi is definitely no exception. And starter monsters get bullied as a rule, but this is a whole different level. I was going to say it's notable that he got improved in Sunbreak a bit, but then I thought, wait, was he even in Sunbreak? Am I just gaslighting myself? And yeah, he was. But I also couldn't remember actually fighting him. He did get improved, though, in the way Sunbreak monsters improved from the base game by giving them 5 cans of Monster Energy Syndrome. He's mid, but above Jaggers. And finally, we have Chhattakabra. So little guy. Look at my dude. You literally cannot hate him. He's useless and doesn't do anything. He's so me-coded. He's like an unemployed dog. What a fantastic monster. Capcom's gift to all the people who are just cute and like to rot in bed. Finally, some representation. So there you have it. All the starter monsters ranked and talked about. What do the best all have in common? I think the most common thread that connects all of them is that they really suit the game they're a part of. The first monster you fight in any game doesn't need to be hard or really special or unique, but it needs to give the player a good first impression of what the game is going to be like. Velocidrome is the original starter monster, and he plays a role in easing you into the game for the first time. Try was a soft reboot for the series and had many parallels to Monster Hunter 1, and Great Jaggy plays his role very well, being analogous to Velocidrome, but taking it up a notch as befitting the 3rd generation of games. Seltus displays the increase in combat intensity and complexity you would see in 4, and Great Macau feels in some ways like the pinnacle of old-gen Monhun design. I think the place where some starter monsters fail is when they just feel generic or uninteresting. You could have put any other monster there and it wouldn't have changed anything. But I mean, really, they all can't be winners. I would be curious to know what the design process is like for these types of monsters. Do they design a monster explicitly as a starter monster, or do they just design several lower tier monsters and then pick one to be the cannon fodder? Either way, I think starter monsters are an interesting thing to look at. The beginning of any game is important to get right, and the first monster you fight in a Monhun game plays a vital role in that. I hope you enjoyed this mostly uncritical analysis of our favorite monsters to beat into a pulp. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See ya.